a consultant and you help startups, this program may be helpful to you. We have a very small live audience, but I'm going to be emailing this to a few people that might be willing to become involved in what we're doing. The Small Business Chamber is a labor of love that I've been involved in for over 20 years now. And we changed the name. Originally, we called it the Idea Association. Then it became the Idea Cafe. And now it's the Small Business Chamber of Commerce, Inc., a Colorado nonprofit corporation that's been no money in, no money out, but is a step towards trying to become a sustainable organization. What sustainable means is that when I go away, it keeps going and helping people with its work. What we try to do is strengthen the grassroots in both business and politics. And, the grassroots is what's made this country great. And Edmund Phelps has talked about that in his book, Mass Flourishing, which has come out recently. It's a terrific book. And I think everyone that's involved in making policy decisions for the country should be reading it, because there is a facade of creativity that's not real. He looks behind the curtain, gets down to what's really happening, which is that 80% of the people in America today hate their job. And we've lost the vitalism and dynamism that had made this country great over 235 years since its founding. And now we're sliding in the direction of, we win the Cold War and we adopt their methods. If the careful market research and careful strategic planning worked as well as the SBA, Small Business Administration, and others seem to think it works, we wouldn't have a market economy, we'd have a planned economy. And that's very much the desire of some people. But anyone that's studied economics, that was my major in college, and I've looked at it carefully. Anyone that's carefully studied economics, unless they have a political agenda, they're trying to build power for themselves and others through a political process. And so I don't think they look at the economic reality of what's happened in this country. We have had a system that's provided more good for more people than anybody in the history of the world. But we're abandoning it. We're throwing in the sponge, as it were. And I think there's where this malaise has come from that Dr. Phelps has documented. What's the solution? Well, I think Dr. Amar Bahidi wrote about it in his book in 1994. Others have come out since then that have adopted his position, but what Dr. Bahidi discovered through careful research of going out and talking to the founders of successful businesses is that successful businesses don't start the way the SBA says that they should start, with careful market research, careful strategic planning. The way they start is someone gets an idea, they try it, if the money comes in, they follow the money and it grows. And that's a far different approach than the kind of planning that has been done in the Soviet Union that the SBA is now encouraging in this country, and others that support their point of view, the Kauffman Foundation. And a cynic might look at it and, a man from Mars would come and look and say, well, this is a mechanism designed to hold down competition. So large corporations will be able to have a cheaper workforce. And I would have to agree with them. It sure looks like that, but I'm not a believer in conspiracy theory. I don't think there are people that get together. I think there's just certain things that happen when good people do nothing. And so those good people, the grassroots in this country that has led to it flourishing up until the late 60s, early 70s, Dr. Phelps has pinpointed when that happened, and there were some reasons for it. But we've lost the vitalism and dynamism that has driven this country, because that's not what you have in a planned economy. In a planned economy, you have shortages, price controls, demoralization, high rates of every kind of alcoholism, every drug abuse you can imagine, and the country starts falling apart. Putin's under the gun. That's why he's stirring things up. But let's look at just our country, what we can do about it, and not just our country, but what we ourselves can do. And so we're going to talk today about the 12-step approach to startup. And this is a one day at a time approach, as opposed to a 5-year long-range plan. We take it one day at a time, and it's half measures avail us nothing if we're not doing it with some sort of a concept of the greater good, of a higher power, of our God then it's going to avail us nothing. And that's happening to many, many people today. And they get involved in a startup weekend, or they read the startup book, they try it, it fails, and they think maybe a different book would help more. Well, maybe there's not a book that can actually help you with your particular business. You're the one that maybe should be writing the book. So we'll talk today about the 12-step approach, and we'll also be continuing this discussion each afternoon now at the Idea Cafe Startup Workshop that I personally facilitate each Friday, 2 p.m. at Panera Bread, 13th and Grant, just a block from the Capitol. We'll try to lure some of the legislators over from time to time. But what we'll be doing there is adopting a 12-step meeting approach. Now, if you aren't familiar at all with the 12 steps, chances are you have no problem with alcoholism, or you may have other problems that you struggle with, but the source for the 12 steps is Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill Wilson it was inspired to write them down. It's been adopted by Alcoholics Anonymous, and then they've made them available in a pamphlet they have called Problems Other Than Alcohol. They explicitly say that anyone that's familiar with the 12 steps should apply them to as many different problems as possible. They talk specifically in the pamphlet about drug addiction, but it's been adopted by many other programs. Now, the programs that exist aren't enough, or we wouldn't have the economic problem that we're faced with today. And so that's what we're going to be trying to do, is to start a 12-step program that will kickstart our economy. And if we're right about that, it should spread quickly and have an immediate impact on our economy. So let's talk about the 12 steps. If you want to know more about them, go to aa.org, aa.org, and search on problems other than alcohol. It'll bring up the pamphlet where AA gives its permission for anyone to take the 12 steps and apply them to other problems. So the first step in Alcoholics Anonymous is that we admitted. Now, we is a very important word. It's not one person doing this, but it's a group. And that's why I'm looking for someone who has learned the 12 steps in some sort of recovery program and then applied them to starting a business. And I have not done that. I've had some 12-step experience. I've read about it. There are a lot of good things about it. There's a contemplative outreach, Snowmass, Father Thomas Keating. He has a series of recordings of a retreat that he did that was contemplative prayer and the 12 steps, where he talks about his understanding of the 12 steps. Richard Rohr has a book that he has written about the 12 steps called Breathing Underwater. And these will be two of our primary documents in exploring how do we apply the 12 steps now to this problem that many of us have, earning a living for ourselves, doing good work. You know, E.F. Schumacher had a book called Good Work. His famous book was Small is Beautiful. It was a bestseller back in the 60s. Good Work was less widely read, but in both books, he really talks about this concept of good work. It comes from the Buddhist concept of right livelihood. What it means is that what you do for a living contributes to our overall good. Adam Smith had that same idea in his book, The Wealth of Nations. His previous book, which also was the last book because he did a complete revision of it just before he died, but Adam Smith wrote two books. One, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which looked at the underpinnings of what he wrote about in the second book, which more people have read, and that is called The Wealth of Nations. And what he found is that in a market economy, decisions are made at the lowest possible level, and it maximizes the good for everyone. Even if one of the actors in an economic transaction is just selfish, if it's a truly free market and there is no coercion, then people freely choose what's in their best interest, and that ends up being the overall best interest of the country. And that ends up getting distorted when you have a planned economy, because people at higher levels don't have the understanding of the problem that they have right at the ground level. So this idea that we do good work goes way, way back to Adam Smith, E.F. Schumacher. Concept of good work is that we earn a good living for ourselves, and we provide a necessary and useful product or service to others, that we're actually of service to others as we maximize what's best for us. And too many in today's world have grown distrustful because of the propaganda that's put out and heavily promoted. The French book recently, just all over bookstores, Capital, they got factual errors all through it. It's not looking at the reality of the situation. It's distortion. It's a piece of propaganda, but it's the book that's promoted, not Edmund Phelps' Mass Flourishing, which would do the country some good. So there is a propaganda effort underway to get us to be a planned economy, and people that are elite, that have an education, that feel like they're not getting paid as much as they'd like, see that the way to open vistas of opportunity for themselves is for themselves to move forward, that it become a planned economy that depends on people like them writing business plans. But let's look back at this country and what's made it successful. And it's been people having a relationship with a higher power, having a mission in life, and taking action. And that's what Adam Smith writes about in The Wealth of Nations. It's what E.F. Schumacher talks about in Small is Beautiful. And that's what we're going to be talking about each Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock at the Idea Cafe Startup Workshop at Panera Bread, 13th and Grant, just a block from the Capitol. I'll send this to some legislators. Who knows? Some might show up. And we'll be doing that each week. But what are the 12 steps? Well, in the first step, we, the key word is we. This is not one person doing it, but we, me and you watching this now, admitted that we were powerless over. Overeaters Anonymous says food. Gamblers Anonymous says our compulsive gambling. The Marijuana Anonymous, we're powerless over marijuana, whatever, the fill in the blank. And what the Idea Cafe Startup Workshop will be brainstorming that. We'll look for your ideas, but the name that I think maybe summarizes what we're most powerless over after we've recovered from some primary problem, alcoholism, drug abuse, sex addiction, whatever it is, that's we're replacing God, this hole in the soul that we have, that we're replacing God with something else. When that's cleared up in a recovery program, what happens is that something's happening on here. We're bouncing around. I hope you're continuing to see this. I hope it's not being intercepted and interfered with. Okay, sorry. Well, maybe that's better. Okay, so we admit, and this is the word that I think we might use, and we'll verify that over the next few weeks. The problem is mission. People used to have a greater sense of being on this sort of divine path that had been opened in front of them. And they step forward and they're doing more for more people. And they're also making money for themselves, doing well by doing good. Some people have written about it in the past. I don't think this is a unique insight of mine. I think this really is what I've heard people talk about at the Idea Cafe since I've first started holding meetings over 20 years ago. 5280 Magazine says these little startup workshops that I've held have infused Denver with an entrepreneurial spirit. I think that overstates the case. I think we've been a tiny little drip on the rock, but even a tiny drip dropping on a rock has some effect over time. And I've been doing it for a long time and listening to people talk about their dreams, aspirations, and a lot of them, the big problem is I have no dream or aspiration. They're just stuck. Or other people come in and they're just overflowing with ideas. They can't decide which idea to pick. And so we've been offering this IDEA, idea approach to business creativity that I developed when I was with the Bell System, with the assistance of Dr. David Fletcher at the University of Denver, one of my former professors, and we did a workshop called Creative Marketing in a Recession. 20 years ago, I adopted the model and started doing these little startup workshops. And I is one of two things. I is either inspiration, that moment when you clearly see a path ahead, or it's identify the target. What's the problem that you're going to set out to solve? And what's become clear over the years is that very few successful businesses start with the second I, the identify the problem. It is just such an expensive proposition to set out to solve some sort of a problem, whereas the inspiration generally comes from lived experience, and you have this insight into what needs to be done that is unique. And it may be unique just in terms of there's no restaurant on this particular corner. Now, Peter Thiel, Zero to One, his recent book, he talks about you shouldn't go into a business unless it's a monopoly. And the problem is he takes that concept, in my mind, too far. He overstates the case, because few businesses really enjoy any kind of insulation from competition. And so I've posted on Twitter and other places. He hasn't responded. I wish he would, but I'd like to have a conversation with him. Who knows, maybe I can lure him onto this show and we become a little more technically adept at how it works. But yeah, the problem is in today's world, everything has a substitute. And this idea that you should only go into a business unless it's a long-term monopoly, I think just freezes people with fear. It contributes, makes the problem worse rather than better. But the truth is that you see an opportunity to do something that nobody else is doing, and you step through that window of opportunity. That's a good way to start a business. So maybe it's a restaurant and there's a corner and your kind of food would make a difference and you'd attract. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to work forever. I just saw the guy that started Ted's, the Philly cheesesteak place downtown, and he did that for about 4 years. He had the idea of starting a business that would improve a neighborhood, and he did. He definitely had an impact on the area, and he did it for as long as he could take it, operating there at 13th and Pearl. Ted's, and I hope to have him on the show or coming by the live workshop, or both in the future. But I've been talking to people like that for over 20 years, and it's just more and more clear to me that people that are blocked from going forward with some sort of a dream are either people that just don't have a dream. They say, my problem is I don't have an idea, or people that are overflowing with ideas. And this tends to be me. I had a boss one time who, when he told me, I was not needed by the company anymore, he said, you and I, John, are different. People go to these workshops on how to have more ideas. He said, you and I are overflowing with ideas. And, what I need is someone to help me with my ideas. I don't need more ideas. And I think he was short-sighted. Now, that didn't stop him from going on to become a millionaire. And I was privileged to have an inside look at how he operated. I learned from him. I've had a lot of jobs. You finally just say you're a consultant. But the benefit of a lot of jobs is that you get a good look at how a lot of companies operate. And I've learned from each one of them, some more than others. Some lessons I wish I hadn't been exposed to. But what's been clear to me through my own personal experience, starting with my dad, who, I was by his side when I was 2 years old as he started his business. Every family dinner was like a business seminar. Saw his business go from start to finish. And then saw him, a lot of times this happens. People are successful in a business and it makes them feel like they can be successful at anything. And so he went into 2 or 3 things that just didn't work out for him. And, it was unhappy at the end of, I think the kind of thing I envision. If when he sold his business, he could have gone to the kind of meeting that I have in mind, it would have helped my dad know what to do next. Other relatives that graduate high school, they finish school, they get tired of this, enough education, they go into the workforce, they get some good experience. I think this would be helpful to them, knowing which way to go. So whether they're just starting out, whether they're retired, thinking of a new direction, that's what we're going to be looking at, is that we're powerless over our mission in life, and our lives have become unmanageable because of, there's nothing more powerful than a man on a mission, man or woman on a mission. That is a powerful thing. The military knows that. That's why they drill. The lowest private needs to know the mission. And I think in business, we forget that too often. It's given lip service in management books. I mean, this is not a new idea that you start with a mission. But I've seen the reality that people either don't have any mission at all, or they have so many of them, they're torn in too many different directions. And so they're like an inch deep and a mile wide. And I definitely suffer from that myself. I'm starting a group that I believe will be helpful to me. But it should help anyone who, if you look at your calendar for today, you're not quite sure what you're going to be doing next week. You look at your calendar for yesterday, for the previous week or two or three, and you're not getting up in the morning, you're not bouncing out of bed with this thought that this is the work that God has given me to do. And you go into it with the enthusiasm, knowing that you're not alone. And I believe the group can be helpful to people that are stuck for either one of the two reasons. We'll see how well that works, and I'd love you to be part of that effort. And we may change this afternoon. We're going to meet at 2 o'clock at Panera Bread, 13th and Grant. I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. I'll have a couple of handouts, and we'll finalize on, is it powerless over mission, or is there a better way to talk about that? One thought I had, what color is your parachute? Is so popular, and I think the book has just gotten better and better with each annual edition. I thought maybe we're powerless over our parachute, but that sounds good to me, but it might not sound as good to the person unlike me. I've read I think just about every volume of that as it's come out each year since 1974. I first read it in the Wichita Public Library, and What Color is My Parachute, combined with Thomas Merton's 7-Story Mountain, has had a lot to do with what's happened to me over the years. But just because I can see that I have this problem of too many, somebody has said to me, well, just do one thing. Other people say, just do two things. Okay, I know that's good advice, but every time I try to cut it down, it sort of multiplies. And in a way, this is a gift, and I am able to help people in these short meetings see possibilities. I think I've provided free thinking. Now, free thinking is a little bit dangerous, that most often advice is worth just about what you pay for it, but not always. I had the instructor of my research methods class in graduate school at the University of Denver said that very often the very best information and advice comes from free sources, and that we tend to discount it because we're not paying for it. And we pay someone a lot of money, and we tune in. I've worked for consulting firms where you go in, they paid money, they listen in a different way than if you go in as a friend or a neighbor, that type of thing. So in 12-step recovery groups, the idea of sponsorship is very important, and that's what I'm thinking, is that we will sponsor each other. And I'm looking for a sponsor who I would like to find is someone who's used the 12 steps to start a business, and I will work with them and then share it with others. And if you know of such a person, please have them call me. If it's you, that's great. Give me a call. Or if you know someone, please call them, or even better, call me and give me their phone number. If you know someone who has started a business, a significant project or campaign, they ran for political office, maybe they have started it in a new career. They became a doctor, that type of thing. And it was as a result of the work that they do in a 12-step program, that they consciously made the effort to do steps 1 through 12 around the issue of not gambling, not alcoholism, not drug addiction. They may have already done that once, but then they use those same 12 steps to start a business or a project or a campaign or a career. If you know someone like that, I would really like to talk with them, talk with you directly, or I'll call them and tell them you said to call, or I'll keep it anonymous. I'll keep you out of it, but give them a call and say that I heard through the grapevine that they had used the 12 steps to start a business. So if you know someone like that, or if that's you, please give me a call, 303-861-1447. That's 303-861-1447. Well, this Idea Cafe Startup Workshop, we are intending to have this broadcast, which may eventually be done in some studio, we'll see, be something that we all have in common, and that then Idea Cafe Startup Workshops will be in every community all across America. This is slightly grandiose thinking. If it's God's mission, good for me for hearing it. If it's not God's mission, this will become clear soon, and I can take another path. But I've been doing this for a long, long time. It's a labor of love. I changed the name to the Small Business Chamber of Commerce as an umbrella for the Idea Cafe Startup Workshops and the other groups I love to organize and facilitate, Franklin Circles. These are based on what Ben Franklin did with his friends. It's a peer advisory group. The big names in peer advisory, for those that pay attention to those kinds of things, Chamber of Commerce people, CPAs, attorneys, sometimes they know about these groups. The big one is, they call themselves Vistage now. It used to be Tech. I've heard, have 37 groups in Denver, and they're very high priced. These are the top people in the big companies. Generally, all those smaller companies too, they have a version for them. TAB, the Alternative Board, is the Denver-based that is popular here in Colorado and other parts of this area. If you do a search on the word the Alternative Board or TAB, you can Well, sorry for that interruption. We're back, and we're past 10:30, so I'm going to stop the show. We'll be here next Friday, hopefully with fewer technical difficulties. My name is John Wren. We're here each Friday, 10 a.m. for a half hour. The Startup Show, sponsored by the Small Business Chamber of Commerce. We'd like to help you do more good work. We cooperate with local chambers across the country to try to help them be more helpful to their members as they start new businesses. If you'd like our help starting an Idea Cafe startup workshop, please give us a call. We also organize Franklin Circles, peer-led peer advisory groups. And if you'd like to join one that we're forming here in Denver, or if you'd like to start one wherever you're located, give us a call. Our number is 303-861-1447. Website, smallbizchamber.org. And you can always give me a call, www.johnwren.com. And be here next Friday. This afternoon, 2 o'clock, we'll be at Panera Bread, 13th and Grant. Maybe we'll see you there. We'll be talking about the 12-step approach to startup. And let's all remember, this life is very short. So let's go get started.